and I thank the tribe for your generosity in hosting us. We are in the Minnesota River Valley, which has been the home to the Dakota people for many generations. This place that is now called Minnesota is the ancestral home of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people and other indigenous people who have lived and cared for this beautiful part of the world for millennia. In this hearing, it is important to understand the government-to-government relationship between Minnesota tribes and the federal government. This is a relationship that is based on the Constitution, the laws and treaties between the United States and sovereign tribal nations, and it is our responsibility to respect and recognize these treaty responsibilities. In this spirit, I am proud to serve and represent Minnesota's tribal nations and urban indigenous communities on the Senate Indian Affairs Committee and on all the committees that I serve. I take this work seriously because I have heard time and time again from tribal leaders who have been frustrated by policy decisions being made without Native voices at the table. I know that the Biden administration understands this and has taken a strong stance that the government-to-government relationships with tribal nations will not be taken for granted. The appointment of Secretary Deb Haaland to the Department of the Interior is historic for this reason. We were honored to welcome Secretary Haaland to Minnesota earlier this spring, and during her visit, she met with, I believe, all of Minnesota's tribal leaders, almost all, in a historic gathering that Senator Klobuchar and I also attended, along with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and Representative McCollum. Being a partner for Minnesota tribes in Washington is a great honor for me, and so I am very glad to chair this field hearing and to welcome Assistant Secretary Newland, Acting Director Fowler, and Mr. Baumann from the federal government to Minnesota to discuss the infrastructure priorities of tribal nations in Minnesota. I want to note that the last field hearing of this committee in Minnesota took place at White Earth, where Senator Al Franken highlighted the importance of addressing the needs of tribal schools, especially Bug-O-Nay-Ge-Shig. In that field hearing, Senator Franken and then Chair Byron Dorgan of North Dakota highlighted the appalling conditions at the school and others like it. After that hearing, and with great perseverance by the bands and Senator Franken, the school received a $16 million grant to rebuild. This is what happens when the federal government-to-government relationship works and when we hold field hearings like this one. We can start in these hearings to address the historic wrongs against Native and tribal communities. So it is fitting that our topic today is infrastructure, and especially how President Biden's Infrastructure and Jobs Act can benefit tribal nations. It is fitting because the federal government has long failed to live up to its promises and trust responsibilities to provide the roads and bridges and broadband and drinking water and wastewater systems that Native communities need. For decades, many Native communities have experienced the direct negative impacts of federal underinvestment and underfunding of critical community infrastructure. Many roads in Native communities are primitive or in poor condition, hurting safety and hampering economic development. Native communities lag behind the rest of the country in accessing broadband services. Just 46% of housing units on tribal land have access to fixed broadband. Native American households, particularly those on trust lands, are 19 times more likely to lack indoor plumbing, contributing to a significant disparity in health outcomes. Tribal nations are rich with cultural and economic opportunities and assets, but it is difficult or impossible to realize these opportunities without adequate infrastructure. So with these disparities in mind, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that passed at the end of last year is a transformational investment for all of Minnesota and for tribal nations. It is the largest long-term investment in our nation's infrastructure and competitiveness in a generation, and the biggest investment in infrastructure on tribal lands. The infrastructure bill will bring billions of dollars to Minnesota for roads and bridges, broadband, water infrastructure, and much more. And it must work for tribes also. So the purpose of this hearing is to understand how these transformational infrastructure investments can benefit tribal nations in Minnesota. This bill has $13 billion for tribal-specific programs and set-asides, and I'm committed to making sure that these resources are equitably distributed and accessible to tribal nations, and that it can make a lasting impact. These $13 billion will help address the long-standing infrastructure inequities in tribal communities that impact the health and economic well-being and safety of Native peoples. Here are just a few highlights. There is $3.5 billion for Indian Health Service sanitation facilities that will make drinking water safe and improve sewage and waste disposal systems. There's $3.8 billion for roads and bridges on tribal lands to make roadways safer for cars and pedestrians. There's $2 billion for broadband on tribal land, which will improve access to education, telehealth, and economic opportunities. And there's $200 million for climate resilience so that tribal nations can plan for and implement responses to climate change. This bill can be a turning point for how the federal government partners with tribal nations, and I will do everything that I can to support the work of Minnesota tribal nations to access these dollars. Now, the tribal leaders who are here today to testify will speak directly to their priority projects, but I'd like to lay out some broad priorities that they have already shared. First, grant funding needs to be equitably distributed and accessible to all tribal governments, especially for smaller tribes. Federal applications and reporting requirements can be burdensome, and it often is difficult for smaller tribes to get access even to compete for these resources, even though their needs are great. It is also deeply challenging for tribes to be put in a position of competing with each other for infrastructure investments that they all need and that have historically been underfunded. Through a robust consultation process, we need federal agencies overseeing distribution of funds to consider these challenges and to resolve them. Second, funding needs to be flexible. I strongly believe that these leaders and the governments that they oversee, which are closest to the needs of their communities, know best what will work in their communities. We need to listen to them and to create the flexibilities that they need to accomplish the most that they can with these resources. And third, Minnesota tribes are ready to lead the way. They are already leading the way on clean energy and sustainability. We had an opportunity, Chairman Anderson, to see a little bit of what the Shakopee-Bedwaukenton community is doing with the organics facility is just one example. We can learn a lot from these smart, bold ideas that Minnesota tribal nations have been tackling on climate change, reducing emissions, and putting their communities at the forefront of a clean energy future. From organics recycling to solar arrays, electric vehicle charging, to PFAS mitigation, tribes in Minnesota are ready to put infrastructure funding to use to address this existential threat of climate change. So I hope that this hearing will be an opportunity for our witnesses to engage with one another and with Congress to celebrate the opportunities for Indian country in the bipartisan infrastructure law and to make sure that this funding is equitably accessible and distributed to tribal nations across the country and in Minnesota. Before I introduce our witnesses, I would like to extend a thank you to Chair Brian Schatz and Vice Chair Lisa Murkowski of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. Although they're not with us today, I am grateful for their partnership and for allowing this important field hearing to happen here in Minnesota. They both have a strong commitment to advocating for American Indian, Native Hawaiian, and Alaska Native people, and I'm grateful for their leadership. I also want to take a moment to thank staff, Connie Connie Sositaharo and Brianne Nuhiwa from the Senate Indian Affairs Committee for being with us today, and also thank my staff, Raven Gibbs and Anna McCloskey, for helping to put this important hearing together. A lot of work has gone into this, and I'm quite grateful. So I'm now going to introduce our witness panel, and we will start with the tribal leaders and then come to the federal government witnesses. I would like to introduce first the Honorable Keith Larson. I keep saying that. I think I'm channeling Deuce here. Yes, the Honorable Keith Anderson, Chairman of Shakopee-Bedwaukenton Sioux Community in Prior Lake, Minnesota. The Honorable Melanie Benjamin, Chief Executive of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. The Honorable Kathy Chavers, Chairwoman of the Bois Forte Band of Chippewa in Orr, Minnesota. and the Honorable Robert Larson, Deuce Larson, President of the Lower Sioux Indian Community in Morton, Minnesota, and the Honorable Kevin Dupee, Chair of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa in Cloquet, Minnesota. In addition, we're grateful to recognize our federal government witnesses, the Honorable Brian Newland, Assistant Secretary, Indian Affairs, U.S. Department of the Interior of Washington, D.C., Elizabeth Fowler, who is Acting Director of the Indian Health Service, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and Jeremiah Bauman, Chief of Staff, Office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, Department of Energy, Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, and we will start with the Honorable Keith Anderson.
Thank you, Senator Smith.
It was kind of you not to call me Senator Klobuchar after all of that.
No, I wasn't quick enough to think of that, but thank you. Hello and welcome again, and I'm going to run right into the oral piece of the letter that we had sent you earlier on our project. Want to thank you guys for the opportunity today in support of the federal investments in tribal infrastructure. As you've seen earlier today, my tribe, the Shakopee, Metawakan, and Sioux community, is guided by our Dakota values. This includes a tradition of living in harmony with our surroundings, as all tribes do, and sharing our natural and material resources in abundance that we have with our neighbors. So our infrastructure, particularly all of our projects that help to protect the environment, is a big part of our commitment. Today, I wish to highlight our one noteworthy project that we had started years and years ago, approximately 10 years ago, and it's called the Organics Recycling Facility. Now, this was born out of a project that didn't start out to be just what it is. It was going to be much more, but I think that our neighbors and even the state and the country aren't ready for source-separated laws and materials that are required to be disposed of in certain ways. But we haven't gotten to that. But as we call it, the ORF, that's the acronym for the Organics Recycling Facility, it's a natural process of breaking down our organics and the materials that would have been tossed in a landfill. And instead, we use a high quality compost and compost blends and mulch. And we sell those products or donate them to local schools, cities, and nonprofits. We have quite a list of those. From 2013 to 2020, the ORF accounted for 23% of all organic material composted in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. So a few years back, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency set a statewide goal of recycling 75% of waste by the end of 2030. And that's an ambitious goal to be met, and it can only be met if our facility dramatically expands its capacity. Our tribe is currently in the permitting phase to relocate the ORF to a new and more industrial location on our land in nearby Louisville Township. Our new ORF facility will be able to process up to 3 times the food waste we now handle. It will also incorporate the latest technology for efficient production odor containment. And it will include a stormwater and PFAS, which is polyfluoral alkyl. Thought I would get that right, but it just looks different than it sounds. Anyway, it's a substance that comes from products that get into plastics and smaller pieces that might be in contamination of but you get it to grind and compost small enough that it just becomes something you want to be able to contain should it rain. And we want to prevent these chemicals from migrating into the groundwater in the Minnesota River. So we greatly appreciate your support of our $2.5 million request for congressional direct spending or community project funding in the fiscal year 2023. This would provide an 80% federal matching contribution against the roughly $3 million stormwater system costs that we're going to incur. And it's a component of our $20 million overall project costs. So we're pleased to see that last week that the same $2.5 million request of our representative Angie Craig has been included in the House Committee on Appropriations draft list in the 2023 projects to be funded. And we hope you are able to persuade your colleagues to include the same request in the Senate's draft fiscal year 2023 appropriations bill. Senator Smith and members of the committee staff here today, the SMSC is grateful for the opportunity to showcase some of our projects and highlight some of our infrastructure that we have rebuilt on our homelands. And we look forward to working with you in the committee on mutual government-to-government commitments and the rebuilding of Indian country infrastructure. I want to make a point before I end here. You know, we're very, very fortunate here at Shakopee, but that doesn't mean that that carries forward to the rest of the tribes in Minnesota, even the region and across the country. For every one of us, there has to be at least 20 or more gaming facilities that provide the intent of tribal gaming for jobs and for adding to the coffers. But they need all of the help they've ever gotten. They need even more. Their needs are greatly unmet. And I think this will be the start of something that I think would be very helpful for tribes across the country. So, Padamia, thank you very much.
Tamyai. Chief Executive Benjamin.
Anin Buju, good morning, Senator Smith and members of the committee. Kwich for this opportunity to testify how federal infrastructure investment can best help restore our native homelands. As we talk about more federal investment in tribal infrastructure, it is important that we consider the historical context. Until the 1990s, there was hardly any federal support for infrastructure in Indian country. The old joke was, you could tell where the reservation begins by where the pavement ends. We have a lot of catching up to do and are grateful to you, your colleagues, and the Biden administration for making sure tribes were included in this historic legislation. In my written testimony, I described several projects we hope will soon be turned into reality for our band communities. For examples, special federal funding is needed for our water and sewer extension project in the town of Isle. This will correct a disappointing decision by the town and federal agencies to completely bypass our tribal neighborhood when the town expanded its water and sewer system. Senator Smith, we are grateful for your support of our request and your current efforts to persuade your colleagues in the Senate and House to appropriate the funds that will correct this modern day miscarriage of environmental justice. Thanks to your efforts, we are partnering with Pine County to expand broadband service into underserved households and communities. Within the next 2 years, many of our band members in Pine County will gain access to affordable, reliable, and high-speed fiber broadband service. This will allow for innovative telehealth services, remote work, educational opportunities, and economic connections. We are also grateful for your support of federal funding to renovate and construct a business incubator building in Hinckley, so we can support new and diverse businesses within our tribal economy. We are excited to see the return on these investments. These are some very exciting developments, but I will close with a request for caution. The Mille Lacs Band is very concerned about the impact of climate change on our environment and has already experienced its effects. Our pine and our maple trees are moving further north, changing the habitat for our plants, animals, foods, and medicines. Even our ceremonies have been impacted because some plants we require are now much harder to find. Lawmakers are pursuing policies that support what they call a green economy in an effort to slow climate change. But too often throughout history, the solutions to problems in this country have been at the cost of Indian tribes and people. We saw it with the railroads that crisscrossed our hunting and fishing grounds, disrupting our way of life. We saw it with toxic air and water pollution from transportation, farming, manufacturing, and electrical power production. And in our Great Lakes region, we've seen it from mining. Senator Smith, our people, our water, fish, and wild rice must not be treated as collateral damage to be sacrificed in the name of pursuing what some call green economic development. I speak of a proposed nickel cobalt mine located in Tamarack, Minnesota. The mine is being promoted as a way to fuel electric vehicles, which are seen as the silver bullet that might slow down climate change. The batteries for these cars currently require nickel, but there are only a handful of known places in the United States where high-quality nickel has been found. This site is only 1.3 miles from the Mille Lacs Band lands and the homes of our tribal members in District 2. The process of removing nickel from the earth is one of the most toxic and dangerous forms of mining in existence. There is a very strong pressure from federal, state, and industry to get that nickel out of the earth. The Mille Lacs Band wants to be a part of the solution to climate change, but we cannot jeopardize the safety and welfare of our people, our drinking water, our lands, and our resources to solve a problem we did not cause. We ask that the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs to assist the Mille Lacs Band in ensuring that infrastructure development for the country does not mean environmental injustice for us. In conclusion, I want to say miigwech to you, the Congress, and the Biden administration for enacting an Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and especially for the emergency scale infusion of federal funding and authority into tribal communities. There is a stunning amount of backlogged need on a reservation and throughout Indian country. The new infrastructure law is a promising good start and a better path to better opportunities for tribal communities so we can catch up to the rest of America. Miigwech, Senator Smith, for holding this hearing in Indian country and for your support of our initiatives. We look forward to our continued partnership with the committee on these issues.
Miigwech Chair. Chief Executive Benjamin, thank you. Chair Chavers, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Smith. Anin Buju, my name is Kathy Chavers, and I'm the chairwoman of the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa. I'm also the current president of the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe, which includes the 6 Chippewa bands, White Earth, Mille Lacs, Fond du Lac, Leech Lake, Grand Portage, and Boys Fort. And I'm very honored and humbled to be testifying to you today on the infrastructure bill. I just want to briefly give you a little information about Boys Fort. We are a small rural tribe located in northeastern Minnesota, 50 miles from the Canadian border. We only have approximately 3,500 tribal enrolled members, and we have 3 sectors of our reservation which are located many miles apart. I have been on the tribal chair and council for since 2016, but I've worked for the tribe for over 30 years in healthcare and education also. And I've witnessed how the band and other tribes have struggled with the inadequate funding throughout all our programs in the many years I've worked. I guess I would like to talk about the flexibility and the ability to have the, how can I say that? Ability to have the, the guidelines that are going to be set forth by the infrastructure bill to allow tribes to use it in a manner that meets our needs and not what the government feels our needs are. The reason being is right now we have a sewer system at what is one of our communities, Indian Point, that we want to pipe underneath the lake to put our sewer system into the City of Orr sewer system. I don't know if any of those categories would fit that, but that's a unique need that Boys Fort has. The tribes are unique with the needs that we have for infrastructure, and due to the inadequacies of funding throughout the years, basically we don't have the infrastructure in place that we need to have. We have individual septic systems that need upgrade. We have a community where 20 to 30 of our drain fields are failing, but we don't have funding to fix them. And so when you're talking about smaller tribes in rural Minnesota, I really applaud the accomplishments of these tribes that have talked before me. We don't have those opportunities. We have critical needs at Boys Fort because we don't have the data for applying for grants. We don't have the staff. The amount of money the monumental amount of money that we receive from ARPA and COVID and the pandemic and now the infrastructure bill is really placing a hardship on our staff with reporting requirements, all the backlog of data that we need that we can't get. We just have to, the financial part of it is really stressing out our accounting department. They're overwhelmed. And we have 300 plus grants within our small tribe that we have to manage along with our small accounting staff to do the ARPA, the COVID, and now the infrastructure bill. Administrative costs would be very helpful for smaller tribes to get the staffing that we need to help with that big backlog of work that's involved with these monies. The other thing is that when we apply for all these grants, please don't make them competitive. We shouldn't have to compete against our neighbors and whatever, because with smaller tribes, we don't have the staff. People wear many hats at small tribes. We need GIS services, for example, at Boys Fort. We can't get the data to fill in for some grants or applications that we want to apply for because we don't have it. It's very expensive. We're very remote. We're not near a city. We're 65 miles from a city. And so water and sewer, we also have ponds that need to be expanded. In order to get more housing, which is such a lack of housing in northeastern Minnesota, we need more infrastructure, more water and sewer put in, but our ponds also need to be expanded. And IHS has their SDS list, but their funding is inadequate to meet that need. They help us so much with so little money, but they need a lot more to even get us to where we can actually manage our own programs and help our people out. It takes many years to get the need on the SDS list through IHS to even get us to where we need to be today. Climate resiliency, because Boys Fort is so small, we don't even have a program that deals with climate resiliency. We don't have the staff. We don't have we need an updated water quality lab. We have the best wild rice in the world. And our dam is in the process of failing. If we lose our dam, we lose our lake. It'll drain our lake. We'll lose our rice and there'll never be net lake wild rice again. Our fish ladders are not working. We declared a state of emergency on our dam. The waters have flooded up north in northeastern Minnesota. Last year was a drought. So it's Mother Nature plays her many courses with us, but we need a lot. Small tribes need a lot. Rural tribes need a lot. Our roads are inadequate. We need equipment. Sometimes we can't purchase equipment. We need a grader for our reservation roads so our tribal members can go hunting and gathering in the woods for their traditional medicines and berries. And we just need adequate funding and resources to deal with climate change and resiliency. How is it impacting our wild rice? How do we do that? Workforce is another industry that is really affecting the tribes. We can't recruit any staff in rural Minnesota. We can't compete with the outside world. We can't. We just cannot get the adequate people that we need to run our programs. We need change. So what I'd like to say in my testimony today is that some of the items that I just listed are some inadequacies we have at Boys Fort. And I've tried to list some of the important ones like GIS, our dam and whatever, but we really need the flexibility. And we also need a formula that will work for all tribes. Boys Fort just acquired 28,000 additional lands in the past 2 weeks from the Potlatch-Deltic Corporation. We're a timber industry up north. We have lots of trees and mosquitoes, huge mosquitoes. But the thing is that if land base is going to be used, I'm not sure what the formula is for this distribution or how it's going to be distributed. Tribes need input on that because right now that land is not within the BIA registry. It was just 2 weeks ago. but that was the largest land acquisition in Indian country, in this country and in the state of Minnesota. But I just want to say that we very much appreciate all the recent funding opportunities that we as tribes have been able to get. It's been almost like Christmas for us every day. We've never had that much money to deal with as tribes. We've always been dealing with inadequacies and making our dollars stretch. It's been very unusual, but as Chairman Dupuy has always said, we have been the most regulated people when it comes to programs and services. And we make the best of whatever funding or situations that arise. So I hope that through our testimony today, that you will listen to the tribes with their accomplishments and us tribes that don't have the resources, people, or funding to do the things that we want to do. So again, Team Kwich, thank you very much for its voice to be heard in this testimony today. Thank you.
Miigwech, Chair Chavers, thank you very much. And we'll now turn to Chair Dupuy from Fond du Lac. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Hello, everybody. Miigwech for this hearing. It's good to see everybody. Senator Smith, thank you so much. Natawas, members of the committee. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I have to say it. I don't know what the protocol is, but I'm going to give up my time for this today. You have my white paper. I've always spoke what I believe I need to speak and how I should say it. I never read from a piece of paper. But where we're at today with this, we have 11 tribes in the state of Minnesota. And again, you received our white paper, so you know the concerns of Fond du Lac and what we have. But with that, it's an opportunity for all 11 tribal leaders that could be here. And so hopefully in the future, we can set this up again in that manner so they're all here to speak. I don't know what the protocol is, but I'd like to give up my time for the representative for Upper Sioux, if that's possible. Miigwech. Okay.
That's fine with me. Thank you, Chair Dupuy. Welcome.
Amadaki Api Chante Wishnep Chuzapido, Adam Hemiedo, the tribal secretary for Upper Sioux community. Chairman Jensvold asked if I could attend this hearing today. And I thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak very briefly on Upper Sioux community's concerns. But the first concern I do want to bring up, and I thank Dupuy and Deuce for approaching me prior to this hearing, because on principle, they disagreed with only 5 of the elected tribes being here today. And we have to constantly do that as Indigenous nations to reaffirm our sovereignty, not only to ourselves, but out of respect for our other tribal nations, because it will be a disservice to each individual tribe if we don't acknowledge that. And I think as Indigenous people, have always known that notion. We opened up today speaking on the Constitution of the United States, and that it's the duty of the federal government to acknowledge treaties and the sovereignty of tribal nations throughout the country. However, I often teach in my college classes that our sovereignty is an inherent human right that preceded the foundation of this country and the Constitution itself. And it's something I take very seriously in my obviously young years of being an elected leader for the Upper Sioux community. We learned of this hearing through Deuce just the other day, and I came because of Chairman Jensvold's wishes. I didn't know what to expect. I was here to listen and observe until, again, as I said, they approached me. In terms of infrastructure, though, for the Upper Sioux community, for the last 15 to 20 years, we've had the self-determination, whether it's a water treatment plant. In 2005, I believe we installed fiber optics, which was the first in the rural area. And just for reference, the Upper Sioux community is about 2.5 hours west of here in a very remote town of 2,800 people, Granite Falls, Minnesota. And due to our self-determination, we're constantly at the whims of local agencies and governments. One example I'll bring up is MediaCom. They don't really appreciate that we have our own infrastructure in terms of broadband, and we have to constantly, again, reaffirm to ourselves that we're competent enough to develop our own infrastructure. And frankly, MediaCom didn't have their fiber optic access up until a few years ago. So the Upper Sioux community was ahead of the curve by at least 10 years in that regard. And at any point in time, we're ready to expand that access. But again, because of the landlocked system we have to live in with the reservation system, we're at the whim of MediaCom in terms of how fast we can increase our speeds. The running joke on the reservation is we still have res internet because it is considerably slower. And MediaCom does have that authority and power to, I guess, limit or inhibit our speed in the first place. We're also at the whims of farmers around in the local area, particularly when it comes to our waterway systems. A constant reference Chairman Genzold makes is County Ditch 9 in the Yellow Medicine County area, that as soon as it hits our reservation, it turns back into a creek somehow, even though we know by June, July, there's E. coli levels in there that makes it unsafe to even be around. In 2019, we had historic flooding in the Minnesota River Valley that we do believe led to the infrastructure depletion of Highway 67, which we've been talking to MnDOT in regards to the right-of-way access, that Upper Sioux would probably assume responsibility in maintaining that highway. So, like I said, fighting the narrative of the local interests, local governments, the county, the state, and frankly, the federal government today, we have to constantly reaffirm ourselves that we're competent. The funding definitely helps, particularly when it comes to the idea of infrastructure. And I just want to make known, though, I think as with all the elected leaders here today, that a constant or consistent story I'm hearing is that we know what we were doing because we are the original caretakers of this land. So again, Padamia or Miigwech, Dupi and Deuce for allowing me the opportunity to speak on Upper Sioux community's behalf. Thank you.
Damiage, could you, Secretary Treasurer, could you please repeat your name just for the congressional record?
My name is Adam Savariego. I'm the tribal secretary for Upper Sioux community.
Thank you very much. Chair Larson.
Ahometakiapi, Tatanki Chapta Talmiado, Etancha, Chansheapi, Demie, Senator Smith, and members of the committee, appreciate the time. My name is Robert Larson. Most folks call me Deuce when you get to know me. And it is my honor and privilege to serve as the president of the Lower Sioux Indian community in the state of Minnesota. Want to say again, Padamia, thank you for allowing me to give my community a voice before the United States Senate Committee on Indian Affairs to discuss investing in Native communities. I do want to echo, though, that I understand time constraints, but there are 11 distinct voices that should be heard at these hearings. I just want to echo that out. Our community, though small, is a sovereign and federally recognized tribe in southwestern Minnesota, about an hour and a half west and south of here. In Minnesota, or the Minnesota Makoche, which was our original homelands. This whole state that is called Minnesota now, reduced to less than our, what do we have, 1,700 acres is our reservation. And our name for that area is Chansheapi, which translates to where they mark the trees red. Despite various federal laws and policy that have been aimed to extinguish our people, and some still on the books today, our citizenship is thriving. The Lower Sioux has experienced a 70% growth since 2000, with over 1/3 of our citizens under 18 and almost half under 50. We thrive despite being exiled in our own homelands that predate the establishment of the United States. Our people risked death to continue to live here, and the fact that we are still here and flourishing is a testament to the strength of our ancestors and the Dakota people. Our goal as leadership for Chashayapi is to always think and act while keeping in mind the next 7 generations. We're encouraged that this act supports specific infrastructure needs and is a tangible example of federal trust responsibility to the tribal nations. This legislation helps support our community as we continue to thrive with our goals of improving infrastructure. Chashayapi intends to use the available funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law to support our endeavors to strengthen sustainability, notably in areas of broadband and wastewater treatment. When our community was shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we, like many governments, communities, and businesses, became more reliant on the internet to continue operations. Having reliable high-speed internet is critical for our continued growth. Our local broadband company self-identifies providing available, reliable coverage, but in reality, that's not the case. Currently, the community has developed a broadband fiber installation plan to improve connectivity for the community's citizens living here. Our goal is that all community citizens living on the reservation will have access to high-quality, reliable internet service. And after completing a feasibility study in the summer of 2020, our hope is to ultimately have fiber broadband installed and operational soon. We also struggle with the inadequate housing, which according to HUD's own study, we are 87 units short of the community's need. With our efforts to build stronger broadband services in our small land base, we need to ensure the future development does not create any inequity in accessing reliable broadband. As our population grows, we have discovered our current wastewater treatment facility cannot accommodate our needs much longer. It's critical that the community builds a new wastewater treatment facility. And again, we're encouraged with these efforts. To us, water is sacred, a life giver, and vital to our growing community. The interconnectedness of our people and the waters of our nation are tantamount to our identity and play a key role in our cultural traditions. We currently have a small project that would allow construction of individual sanitation facilities for 3 new and other category homes, including homes we're building with hempcrete that we hope to get started this year. We're growing our own and having a facility to make the hempcrete. With our growing population, the demand will only continue to rise. These systems are costly and critical to ensure safe living conditions for the health and welfare of our citizens, and to prevent overcrowding in homes, which often can inundate existing systems. Funding from this bipartisan infrastructure law supports the community's sustainability efforts and supports Chashayapi's official vision that the Lower Sioux Indian community is a healthy, safe, and happy community, grounded and guided by Dakota culture, traditions, and language, where every person contributes to a diversified social and economic life. The people grow, adapt, and innovate together through opportunities that span the generations and seek continuous success. And out of respect for the time, our written testimony has more information, vital infrastructure needs related to the endeavors that will support job opportunities and road safety measures. We're very appreciative of every member of Congress who supported this bill. The community also thanks Senator Smith's office for keeping us apprised and for providing more information about the community, the many funding opportunities that come from this historic law. The community also thanks Chair Schatz and the entire Senate Committee on Indian Affairs for the invitation to testify before you today. Padami Ado.
Thank you very much, Chair Larson. I appreciate that. I also want to just note and give greetings to Grand Portage Chair Duchamp. Thank you for being here. All of the Minnesota tribal leaders are going to have an opportunity to join together for a working lunch with the committee after this, and I look forward to that as well. I'll now turn to the Honorable Brian Newland for your testimony.
All right, there we go. Honey Buju, Minugija, Nibanami Kana Bamose, Indigenous, Mayan Dodem, Ginoshikaning and Donjaba, Anishinaabe and Dao. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Newland. I'm Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs here at the Department of the Interior, and I'm really glad to be back home-ish in the Great Lakes region. And prior to serving in this role, I served alongside many of the tribal leaders here as tribal chairman for my own tribe, the Bay Mills Indian community. And I just have to say it's a blessing to be amongst them again. I learned a lot from them during my time as tribal leader, and particularly through the pandemic when I watched many of my friends here lead not only their communities, but serve as examples for pandemic response for the entire nation. And so I'm really glad and honored to be here. And Senator Smith, grateful for the invitation from the committee to appear before you today. And also grateful, Chairman Anderson, for hosting this hearing, this field hearing. It's always great for us to have an opportunity to get out into Indian country and into communities where we're hearing directly from tribal leaders and representatives. In total, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, invests, as you noted, Senator, more than $13 billion directly into tribal communities, and tribes may apply for billions more through various other grant programs. From this law, the department has received more than $3.1 billion directly for tribal communities, and tribes have been made eligible by Congress for additional department programs to support building resilience for wildland fire and drought, restoring ecosystems, and enabling fish passage. The department began implementation of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act with 3 tribal consultations covering all of the programs for which tribes are eligible. And we heard some consistent themes in those consultations, including the need for interagency coordination, technical assistance, and streamlining our permitting process. The White House Council on Native American Affairs and its committees meet regularly to discuss our work to implement the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. And our Indian Affairs spend plan includes the creation of an interagency coordinator position and regional positions to directly provide tribes with the technical assistance we heard during those consultation programs. The timely approval of permitting and realty actions are critical to success, and the BIA recently issued an update to our permitting national policy memorandum to streamline the rights of way and business leases for projects that are funded by the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, as well as telecommunications and renewable energy projects. We want to make sure that we are not the choke point that keeps this money from turning into benefits at the tribal community level. Overall, Indian Affairs within the Department of the Interior received $466 million through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which included $216 million for tribal climate resilience, adaptation, and community relocation. And in addition to our grant program on this topic, the department will announce several community relocation pilot projects to serve as demonstration sites for the United States to relocate willing communities on the front lines of climate change. And we know that leveraging federal funding through this act and the rescue plan and other appropriations with our partner agencies is going to be critical to our success. We also received $250 million for irrigation and power, safety of dams, and water sanitation, with $50 million available to us to spend each year. And this funding is critical to address our deferred maintenance backlog in these areas. In FY22, we allocated $10.6 million for water sanitation. Water and sanitation project funding has been coordinated with IHS and will be used to support improvement and repair projects that address public health and safety compliance issues at our BIA-owned drinking water and sanitation systems. In FY '22, let me back up, Senator, and just note that even though those are BIA-owned systems, that they are direct service systems and directly benefit people in tribal communities. In FY '22, we allocated $10 million for irrigation and power projects. Within this total, 70% are directed to Indian irrigation projects, and 30% of that funding is used to support BIA-owned power utilities. And for safety of dams, we invested $29.1 million in FY '22 to begin to address the $1 billion deferred maintenance backlog for BIA-owned dams. The department has received funding in other areas from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. In February, for example, we allocated $1.7 billion to fund Indian water rights settlements that have been enacted and fulfilled all of the outstanding federal payments necessary to complete the terms of those settlements. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act also provided $150 million to address orphan wells and well sites on tribal lands. And the act provided the department with $905 million for ecosystem restoration and resilience funding. Tribes and tribal lands are eligible for most of that funding, whether through grants, agreements, or contracts. And in this fiscal year, BIA received as a portion of the department's funding $4.8 million for these activities. We are also providing nearly half of those funds as competitive grants through the America the Beautiful Challenge Fund administered through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Indian Affairs is engaged with other federal agencies to implement the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. And for example, the BIA is in the process of allocating funding from the Department of Transportation to tribes for the Tribal Transportation Program here in Minnesota and across the nation. So these are just some of the examples and highlights of the work we're doing under the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. I do want to note that between the American Rescue Plan and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, tribes here in Minnesota have received nearly $47 million in funding, separate and apart from the rescue plan funding that the Treasury Department distributed to tribes. So this has been a historic level of investment in Indian country. And as Chief Executive Benjamin mentioned, we've got a lot of catching up to do. And I've heard a tribal leader in one of our consultations describe this as the great catch-up. Not the great bottle of ketchup, but the great catch-up on infrastructure investment. And it has been transformative in many tribal communities and is a great way for us to start in our work between our co-equal branches of government and meeting our trust responsibilities. So Senator Smith, I want to thank you and thank the committee for inviting me to testify today. We have submitted our complete testimony for the record, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fowler.
Good morning, Senator. And our honorable tribal leaders and my distinguished federal colleagues. I really am thankful for the opportunity to be here this morning. I appreciate the warm welcome. Pleased that we have our area director for the Bemidji area Indian Health Service, Mr. Daniel Fry, here this morning as well. I am thankful that I have an opportunity to provide an update on the Indian Health Service programs benefiting American Indian and Alaska Native communities under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I testified on May 4th on this topic and provided a lot of background on our sanitation facilities construction program. So this morning, I think I would like to just provide a few updates since that have occurred since that time. On May 31st, the IHS announced the fiscal year 22 allocation decisions for $700 million that was appropriated to the Indian Health Service within the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Leading up to the allocation decision, the IHS conducted 3 virtual tribal consultations on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act from November 22nd, 2021 to January 5th, 2022. And based on review and consideration of input received through tribal consultation, the IHS decided to use current sanitation deficiency system data and the agency's existing funding mechanisms to allocate these resources. This includes IHS direct service projects funded through federal acquisition regulations, contracts, or tribal procurement, and Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act construction contracts. The IHS will allocate approximately $581 million in fiscal year 22 funding for Tier 1 project construction costs. A Tier 1 project is considered ready to fund because planning is complete. The IHS will also allocate $60 million for design and construction document creation activities related to these Tier 1 projects, which include engineering design activities for proposed sanitation facilities, contract documents, and contract plans and specifications. Tier 2 projects have a level of their engineering assessment complete and have a well-understood deficiency and a recommended solution, while Tier 3 projects have deficiencies identified but are still in the planning phase, which may include identifying solutions. The IHS will allocate approximately $33 million in FY22 funding for the planning, design, and construction contract document creation for Tier 2 and Tier 3 projects. The IHS will also use its fiscal year 2022 annual appropriations to support additional planning, design, and construction document creation activities for Tier 2 and Tier 3 projects. The sanitation deficiency system currently includes 661 Tier 2 projects totaling approximately $2.2 billion and 361 Tier 3 projects totaling approximately $505 million. These allocation decisions align with recommendations from tribal leaders from our tribal consultation to prioritize funding for projects that have completed the planning phase and can be immediately placed into the design and construction phase, and to provide sufficient funding for planning and design activities to get projects ready to fund. Now, within the IHS Bemidji area, which includes Minnesota, 19 Tier 1 projects totaling nearly $9.3 million in IHS eligible costs will be funded with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act appropriation. And a listing of those Tier 1 projects was included in our written submission. Here in Minnesota, IHS will allocate in fiscal year 2022 nearly $1.6 million to the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe White Earth Band for the Rice Lake Sewer Extension, nearly $3 million to the Menominee Indian Tribe for Kashina Sewer Improvements, approximately $9,000 to the Lower Sioux Indian Community for lift station grates, and $41,000 to the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe Fond du Lac Band for the Ridge Road Water System water meter installation. Historically, IHS has received limited program support resources to address the SFC project workload. SFC project funding has increased since fiscal year 2018, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding will significantly increase the SFC workload. However, the IIJA limits funding for program support activities to 3% per year. Given this limitation, it is possible that the average project duration could be greater than the current average project duration of 3.6 years. The IIJA also restricts program support funding to federal activities, which means that tribes that operate their SFC projects directly cannot access these needed administrative resources. To address this need for administrative support, the fiscal year 2023 President's budget requests more than $49 million in facilities and environmental health support resources to support IIJA implementation. And this funding would be available for federal activities and to tribes who compact or contract under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act to implement SFC projects. This investment is critically necessary to maintain existing project completion deadlines and ensure successful implementation of IIJA resources. We look forward to continuing our work with Congress related to the SFC program and the use of IIJA funds to make improvements in tribal communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler. We'll now hear from Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, Senator Smith, and thank you, honorable tribal leaders. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I work with the Department of Energy. My name is Jeremiah Baumann. I'm the Chief of Staff to our new Undersecretary for Energy Infrastructure. It's an honor and a privilege to be here on the ancestral lands of the Dakota, on your ancestral lands. And thank you for hosting, Mr. Chairman, here on the lands of the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, Sioux. I'm on a personal note, eager to be here. I graduated from Rosemont High School, just a few miles down County Road 42. I should confess, last time I was at Mystic Lake, I don't think my parents knew, so we'll keep that among us. I thought my written testimony has been submitted, and there are sort of lists of different programs, both for which tribal nations and urban indigenous communities can get direct allocations of funding out of Department of Energy, as well as those where Congress set it up as a competitive program. I thought rather than list them all out, I'll talk a little bit about how we're organizing the Department of Energy to implement these programs in a way that hopefully maximizes accessibility, especially for Indian country, and then talk a little bit about some of those programs sort of grouped by themes to give a sense of some of the opportunities, and hope that that sets up for us to learn how to best improve access to our programs. And then I do want to mention briefly some non-IIJA programs that might help as tribal communities look to navigate some of our programs, or that might also help maximize opportunities. So first, in terms of how the department is approaching the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the department takes very seriously its trust responsibilities, and more than that, the president's directive to uplift and meaningfully engage all overlooked and marginalized communities, but particularly our indigenous neighbors and community partners for whom we know too long our programs have not been made accessible, but for whom for too long the energy systems of the past and our current energy economy have caused damage or harm or left disproportionate burden. And so we take our responsibility to fulfill the president's commitments to equity very seriously. And we think that when it comes to building a new clean energy economy, which is the current charge of the Department of Energy, it's a chance to hopefully go beyond catching up, and there is catching up to do with our energy infrastructure and certainly with the energy infrastructure in tribal communities, but to actually address historical injustices by building a new clean energy economy that is more just and more equitable in terms of how it is built, how it is planned, on everything from not just consultation and engagement, but to actually equitably distributing benefits to as great a degree as we can. You may have heard of the president's commitment, often referred to as Justice 40, the commitment to strive that 40% of the benefits of clean energy investment will flow to disadvantaged communities, including people of color, including tribal nations, including low-income communities who have too often been on the bad end of the disproportionate distribution of harms and burdens in our energy system. We have a Senate-confirmed leader of an Office of Economic Impact and Diversity at the Department of Energy who is translating what that means when it comes to building a new clean energy economy. And if you look on our website, we have defined 8 categories of energy benefits that range from minimizing new environmental burdens and reducing historic environmental burdens to reducing the disproportionate energy cost burden that is faced by too many tribal communities, to, in some cases, I think the most extreme energy injustice in the country, the tens of thousands of people in Indian country who still don't actually even have access to affordable, reliable electric power from the grid. So that is one theme that cuts across how we are planning our investments in infrastructure investment and Jobs Act programs. There are 72 of those programs that total $62 billion in funding. And the Secretary has charged us as we design how the program will work, how the funds will be distributed, to embed those equity principles into each of the programs. We're also actually organizing the structure of the department itself in ways that we think will make us more accessible, make our programs more accessible for a variety of communities. DOE is interesting as an agency in that for most of its history, about 80% of our resources have been research and development, developing new energy technologies in labs, trying to, the next generation of solar panels and wind technology that brings costs down and makes it more accessible. But we haven't actually specialized in how to more directly make those technologies more accessible with the predominance of our funds. Our energy efficiency and renewable energy teams have done a lot of work in that regard. But we see this as a huge opportunity because with the good work that Senator Smith and others did in putting together this law, 90% of the funds, more than 90%, are actually for both demonstrating technologies, so helping both investors and companies that are going to deploy these technologies, understanding new technologies, but demonstrating them in ways that help communities understand the technologies. What are the pros and cons of these technologies? What are the costs? What are the risks and benefits, to help figure out how they want to deploy the technologies, but also directly supporting communities in deploying those technologies. So the Secretary created a new Office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure. And instead of being organized the way we energy nerds organize things by renewable energy and fossil energy and nuclear energy and electricity, it's organized by the strategy or the community that we are trying to serve with these demonstration and deployment projects. So we've created a new Office of State and Community Energy Programs, and we've actually moved the Office of Indian Energy Policies and Programs to sit alongside our state and community energy programs so that we are working together to build the capacity of the department to support clean energy deployment. And then those officers are sitting alongside our loan programs office, our clean energy demonstrations office, our manufacturing energy supply chains office, so that all of these programs are working hand in hand with the teams that are working to help these technologies get deployed in communities. Let me just talk briefly about a few of the types of programs that I think might be of particular interest. First, we have 3 primary programs where Congress gave us a formula allocation that includes tribal nations and communities getting a direct allocation of funding. Those include energy efficiency and conservation block grants. It's $500 million to be used for a wide range of clean energy purposes, from planning what your community wants to have happen to its energy systems to actually deploying energy efficiency or renewable energy projects. The Weatherization Assistance Program, which is a longstanding program that improves home energy efficiency for low-income families. Those funds, there's a huge infusion of $3.5 billion into that program. Those funds flow through both tribes and states to nonprofit action agencies that actually do hire contractors and do the energy efficiency work in homes. And I should highlight that program is also eligible to be used for workforce development and training a local workforce to do the work in buildings that will make those buildings more comfortable and reduce energy bills for families. And then the third category, where there are formula dollars that directly allocate funds for tribal nations and communities, is in the Department of upgrading our electrical grid infrastructure. Specifically, one program called Preventing Outages and Enhancing the Resilience of the Grid allocates $2.5 billion by formula to states and Indian tribes, primarily for increasing resilience to natural hazards that are increasing with climate change, for wildfire, storms, flooding, et cetera. And a wide range of resilience activities are eligible, including building and developing microgrids and distributed energy resources, which I know is something many American Indian and Native Alaska Native communities have expressed interest in. Let me mention, before I move on to some of the non-formula
Mr.
programs.
Baumann, I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry.
I know it's quite difficult because we don't have timers on the table, but if I could ask you to wrap up your verbal testimony, we'll have time to look at all of the written testimony so that we have time for questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me just quickly acknowledge one challenge, which is that some of the formula programs, unfortunately, the way the formulas work, do result in quite small allocations, specifically to tribal communities. And I think it was Chairwoman Shavers who mentioned the cost that can be imposed in terms of overhead and paperwork and financial reporting. So we are looking very hard at how we can be creative to help people access these funds in ways that may not have that overhead or that might leverage really small grants for much bigger benefit. So I'd be happy to talk more about some of those opportunities, including other programs of the department, as you would like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our testifiers. We're now going to move into a question period. And because it's just me asking questions, I want to just, I'm going to open up with some questions to our tribal leaders. And but I want to just sort of welcome some give and take. And if the tribal leaders have specific questions that you'd like to ask of our federal witnesses, I'd be really happy to facilitate this. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and it's not possible for us to get all of our questions answered. But my goal from this is that we can get some next steps I can then take back to the committee for the work that we can do together. So let me just start out with a question to any or all of the leaders here. As you think about I love this, I can't remember who said this, but the idea of the great catch-up when it comes to infrastructure, roads, bridges, broadband, water, and sewer. Yeah, welcome back, Chair Dupuy. Chair Duchamp, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you certainly would be more than welcome to come and join as well. I would just like to hear a little bit from our tribal leaders, the tribal leaders that are here. What do you see as the most important impacts of this infrastructure spending? And this gets to what is embedded in all of your testimony. And what is like the one or two most important things we can do to this, that this $13+ billion in formula dollars, as well as grant dollars, what is the most important thing we can do to make sure that you have good and equitable access to those resources? So what do you think will be the greatest advantage, and what do you think is the most important thing we can do to ensure equitable access to these resources? Would anybody like to start?
I will.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Chief Executive Benjamin, and then Chair Dupuy.
I think we've heard a lot of the tribal leaders talk about the allocation of funding and direct funding to the tribes. I think is something that's going to be very beneficial. And I think when I think about the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, we are a smaller tribe, but we've been fortunate that we have a grants department that can assist in securing some funding, even though they're overloaded as well. But direct funding, I think, is so important to tribes. So the smaller tribes or other tribes that don't have the capacity are not left out of the opportunity to have funding to make a better life for their community members.
Thank you. Chair Dupuy.
I think the impact isn't here yet, but to Melanie's comments, I completely agree with that. It's one of the biggest things that tribal leaders have been saying for years, ever since I've been part of this since 2002, is direct funding. Allow us, if we get the direct funding, it allows us to build what we need. It allows us to look at the need, but most importantly, the unmet need. And by traveling to the reservations, some of you get to see the good thinking, the good ways that tribes are implementing stuff. For example, microgrid. Fond du Lac has electrical corridor microgrid. And my brother over here brought up the infrastructure piece of broadband. We also have our own broadband company started before COVID. And we need to be able to access that out farther than what it is off the reservation boundaries. But it's imperative that the direct funding comes to the tribes. That allows us to do what is needed for our constituents, but most importantly, so we can secure a future for the unborn. That's the ultimate goal with tribal leaders. So, Kwich.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of the dollars that we get through IHS for projects, they require a tribal match. Some of the smaller tribes, we're in no position to make that match. We have a sewer project that's in the works. It's on our SDS list. It got the line there that, where's your part coming from? We don't have that. So it comes with a lack of funding for us up north and a lack of a grant department too. So
Thank you. And for the record, Chair Duchamp, could you just identify yourself?
Robert Disha, the Grand Portage Tribal Chair.
Thank you very much. Would other tribal leaders like to comment on this, answer this question? Chair Larson?
I think the biggest piece is just respecting the tribes as sovereigns.
Mhm.
Like they said, we know what the needs are. The restrictions on some of the funding pieces are what hurt. Not having access to the match, not having departments that, I mean, we have an environment office of one staff. So when we're talking climate issues, we have one staff. We have a grant writer and a new grant writer that is learning. So those things aren't always as easy as you think, just write a grant and you can get it. So we just want to put those out there.
Thank you. Chair Chavers, did you want to say something?
Yes, I would like to say for some of the programs that you listed, the direct funding allocation would be great for tribes, but it's when the funding comes or when it's announced, sometimes it's like a square trying to be fit into a round hole for us because it doesn't meet any of those categories or those funding opportunities. Our uniques are need. So don't make such specific funding categories where it can't meet our need. That's why I think the direct funding is better. If you can do the direct funding, then basically the tribes have the ability to say, well, we can address that need with that funding, but if we went your route, we wouldn't even be able to access the funds. All the programs you mentioned, sir, Mr. Bowen, no disrespect, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. I'll be honest. And I'm a small rural tribe in need of Department of Energy money. We don't have renewable energy. We don't have any type of energy needs that are being met because we don't know about them. We're small. You have to realize we're the tribes that are small. One environmental staff. Yep, we have one. That's the comments I have.
Chair Chavers, how many people do you have? Just help us understand that a little bit better, because I think this is a really big deal. And when you're getting information, others can respond to this as well. Secretary Salvarejo, I'd love to hear from you as well. But when you are receiving information about funding opportunities, especially grant opportunities, which is the biggest challenge, it seems to me, like, how do you get that information? How do you all get that information? And what would be better ways of getting access to what is available out there?
Usually a tribal leader and or a director of a program will get the funding opportunity, the funding announcement letter, and then we route it to the appropriate individuals. We have one grant writer. And we have to prioritize what our grants are going to be used for. Right now, we've got issue with elderly housing.
Right.
And then the other part about it is having the ability to provide the backup documentation for that grant, the data.
You mentioned this in your testimony.
We don't have the data. We don't have the capabilities of collecting that data. And so we hear about shovel-ready projects. We're scrambling to get shovel-ready projects because we've don't have the resources. So a lack of resources, I think, in staff and collection data, broadband, internet. We're doing our own fiber to home. We're finally going to have high-speed internet. Internet is huge in rural areas in all tribal communities because with the pandemic, it came to the forefront. So that's what the resources and it's just, we have a lot of inadequacies that you think of the larger tribes, and I'm thinking like Southwest and whatever, but in our area, we're all struggling with staff.
I just want to reiterate her point because.
If I could just, I'm sorry, I know that the folks who are trying to keep a record of this committee hearing are going to, so if you could just identify yourself when you speak so that the folks that are keeping a record will be able to know who's speaking. Thank you very much.
Tribal Secretary for Upper Sioux Community, Adam Salvariego. Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
Oh,
Good.
I guess for the past year for the Upper Sioux community, just the lack of professional talent, particularly in rural areas, has been difficult. Particularly for our tribal planner, who is our lead grant writer. It took us 8, 9 months to finally just get a resume submitted for application. And then obviously someone, if they're not privy to tribal nations, sovereignty, and the politics of it all, you know, that's another year-long process for them to learn the needs of our tribal community. So direct funding access, as we keep mentioning, has helped a lot. I think of the ARPA funds, the ability to use those funds immediately for a variety of different programs post-COVID or the post-pandemic phase was really beneficial to our tribe. But as Due said, you know, tribes know themselves best, and so believe us when we say that ultimately, particularly because of the lack of staff. If we're not a metro area tribe by any means, it's just been a battle, like I said, for the past year now in this position, looking for someone with the capability and competence to attract them to a town of 2,800 people in Southwest Minnesota.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on this question?
As
Yeah.
far as getting the information?
As both, yeah, the question, yeah, as far as getting the information, let me go to Chair Anderson, because I don't think you've had a chance to speak on this question yet. I'm asking generally sort of two related questions. One, what do you see as the benefit of these infrastructure dollars, and what specifically do we need to do to make sure that that benefit can be equitably distributed? And we've had some really good comments about direct funding, flexibility. Chair Anderson, please.
Hi, yeah, Chairman Anderson, the Shakopee Metawakan and Sioux community. I wanted to mention and reiterate all my addressing of your questions were answered. But and the biggest piece of the lack of workforce, especially in the rural areas, is and expertise is going to have to be addressed in this funding. I think you might have some allowance for that assistance. And then if you have a lack of workforce to get these projects shovel ready, you'll just keep dragging it on. So I think that direct funding, and you know, there might even be a question about the equitable distribution of it as well. I mean, you have more needs in certain areas, and I think, Brian, you certainly addressed, you know, all of these things the BIA is responsible for. And I like the tiered effect of the sanitary funding that the IHS is looking at. There's a, you know, piece for the planning process. We all know that it takes a certain percentage of the dollars it takes to do a project. So if you've got $1 million project, you know, you might spend 100,000 on planning for it or engineering it. So all of these things, along with everything everyone was saying about access, open communication, impacts the timing of all of these projects, especially for the rural tribes, because they need that time to make sure they're doing the right thing, and the planning process is so key to that. So,
Thank you. Chair Larson.
I think the piece that would go along with it is that technical assistance would be nice. We have gotten a lot of the information from your office. Raven has been great, I will have to say. And I think to be able to get that technical assistance for our staff to help navigate through it would be a great help.
Thank you very much. Chair Dupuy.
I'd just like to add on the technical assistance. If we take a look at it, and you can vouch for this too, is that for a very long time, we never had that. So a lot of different things were put into place, started with the initiation of Indian gaming, for example. I can speak for Fond du Lac. We didn't call outsiders in to build a casino. We didn't call outsiders in to do this. We did it on our own. But it only carries so far. And the principals that come in as a tribal leader, all grant principals will come to me as an email. Then my job is to disperse that out to whoever we have. But there is a lack of technical assistance or technical knowledge within inside of that structure. That infrastructure bill will allow tribes to set that up also within our community colleges and principles like this for this training and technical assistance that we need. But again, it all goes back to one simple thing, in my opinion, is that direct funding. If anybody in the country knows how to stretch the dollar, the tribes would prove that. The tribes have proved it over and over that we're the group of people who are forced to stretch the dollar, to try to make things work, and to look out for, again, the most important thing is what we do today as tribal leaders is to protect the future for our unborn and ensure that there's a future for our unborn. So there's things that we need, but it kind of relies to that simple principle of giving us the direct funding allows us to build the infrastructure what we need to reach our unmet needs. It's nobody else's responsibility because nobody else can do it. For 530 years, somebody's trying to tell us what's best for us and it's failed. And if we get that direct funding, that allows our tribes to build up that infrastructure that we need to secure that future again for our unborn. Miigwech.
Thank you. I want to ask if Mr. Roy would like to say a few words. I see you've joined the table. Please, you could just please identify yourself for
Thank
the.
you, Senator Smith. My name is Secretary Treasurer Alan Roy of the White Earth Nation. And I just really appreciate the comments that are being offered by our federal counterparts. It's very encouraging to hear Mr. Bauman with his remarks related to energy. I know in my last leg of my service in tribal government, we focused on a number of areas there. And it's just very encouraging to see that there's plenty of opportunity out there. I would just say communication is a huge thing. I think Ms. Chavers has emphasized that. We just don't know about a lot of these programs. And I think just by having a field hearing and bringing the folks out here to meet us makes a huge difference. And so that leader-to-leader discussion, it can't be replaced by email or Dear Tribal Leader letters. I get tons of those every week, but just seeing somebody face to face makes a huge difference. So thank you.
Rich. I'm going to turn to our federal witnesses here. I'm quite confident that the emphasis that you're hearing from tribal leaders today around direct funding and flexibility, challenges around tribal match and technical assistance are all things that you're quite familiar with. Maybe Mr. Newland, would you like to respond and just tell us a little bit about how the federal government, where you are, and especially in Interior, is working to respond to these needs from tribes?
Sure. At the Department of the Interior, we have much clearer legal authority to do the direct funding that we've heard about today through Public Law 638 contracting, as well as self-governance annual funding agreements. And many of our fellow agencies don't have that explicit power. And so the relationship, rather than being a government-to-government relationship, is often, when we talk about square peg and round hole, becomes a grantor-grantee relationship. And so we've heard about this and also have heard about, Chair Chavers, the frustrations about not knowing all of the other components of funding available to tribes. We're trying to do that, get at that in a number of ways, including through the White House Council on Native American Affairs and making sure that our folks in BIA, who often in the field have the most regular communication with tribal leaders and staff, are conduits for that information. And I'm also aware that when it comes to these notifications for consultation or funding availability, they come either not at all or all at once. And so as tribal leader, you go to your mailbox in the tribal office and there's a stack this thick of tribal leader letters from different agencies, and consultations are overlapping and deadlines are overlapping. And so your staff of one or your staff of one half are forced to come to you as tribal leader, your tribal administrator, and try to triage all of that. And it's very challenging. So we're working at the Department of the Interior with our colleagues across the government to help folks understand self-determination and flexibility. In Executive Order 13175 from President Clinton, it talks about consultation, but it also directs federal agencies to work with tribes on waivers for these program requirements. for grants so that when there are technical requirements that tribes can't turn on a dime and meet quickly, that agencies have a directive from the president to waive those requirements in partnership with tribes. And so we're trying to educate our colleagues and other agencies on their authority, and not only their authority, but their directive from the president to use those powers and to work with tribes on consensual policymaking. And then to coordinate our consultation notices and notices of availability, and to really turn our relationship across the federal government away from a grantor-grantee relationship into a government-to-government partnership. And we've seen that with the rescue plan funding, as the secretary noted, when it comes with the ability to use as needed to respond to crises and urgent needs without a lot of with a lot of flexibility and without a lot of really detailed restrictions. We've seen tribes do just amazing work with that to benefit their own communities as well as neighboring communities.
I remember quite well, leaders, the many conversations we had between the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, which I think was an example of a significant improvement in terms of providing direct funding. And I've been able to visit some of the tribal nations around the state to see the benefits of that in terms of what you have already, how you've already deployed those resources so effectively. But I want to follow up, Mr. Newland, on something that you said. It's really, I think, important that rather than a government-to-government relationship, which is what should be, we have a grantee-grantor relationship, which is a completely different thing. And you mentioned, I think, that there are challenges because not every agency has the authorities they need in order to fulfill that government-to-government treaty and trust and legal responsibility. Did I understand that correctly? So because that's a congressional issue.
Correct. The 638 contracting authority is really limited, to the Department of the Interior and to Indian Health Service, and then there are examples in other agencies for limited purposes. And so even where we have agencies that have an agency officials that have a desire to provide a lot of the flexibility with funding that we're talking about, they don't have the broad scope of authority to do that we have within Indian Affairs. And so the executive order that President Clinton issued, that President Biden has reaffirmed, tries to make up for that by directing agencies to waive some of these restrictions. But that's a muscle that hasn't been exercised consistently in the last 2 decades. So, it's a workaround for some of these challenges, but it doesn't shave the square peg into a round peg.
Thank you. I think that's very important, and I think suggests place for further work on the part of Congress. I think a lot of times federal agencies are trying to figure out how to implement something that when Congress also has a job to do that it hasn't done. And I'm also just struck by the fact that, I can't even count the number of federal employees that must work in all of the agencies that are interacting one way or another with tribal governments, and the level of understanding of what that government-to-government relationship should be is dramatically different. I know the state of Minnesota has worked very hard to do significant training around what that government-to-government relationship looks like, and I think that and I know there's work that's being done in the Biden administration to try to improve that, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of individuals that one way or another are doing this work, and it's one of the reasons why on the side of the tribes that it often doesn't feel like there's a kind of coordination and cooperation. I think Chair Dupe wanted to say something, and then I just want to give a chance to, we are going to wrap up in a few minutes. Want to give a chance to Ms. Fowler, Mr. Bauman, if you have something else you wanted to add to this conversation.
I was on a call not too long ago about tribal ecological knowledge. And the conversation that we're talking about right now was brought up within that. When you have that many agencies that want to work with tribes, it becomes a logistical nightmare. And one of the things that we're saying is they want to have consultation with all the tribes. Well, there's 576 tribes. How is that going to happen? So the conversation went into a regional, but it also went into the training, what's going on within the state of Minnesota and how you can apply that at a federal level. Because within the consultation policy at the federal level, it works both ways. And so the question I'm going to ask you, Natawis, is the executive order, if I remember reading it, I can't remember if it says shall and will or may. And so I think the executive order where it's put into place is how the interpretation comes through. The tribes, when they request that under the interpretation or request that waiver principle designated in an executive order, an agency will turn around and says, no, we're not going to do that. So by an executive order put into place, it becomes law. So don't want to make it any harder than it is, but agencies are violating the law. And that's one of the issues that we ran into the state of Minnesota is the execution of statutes that if they don't follow the statutes, it's violating law or breaking the law in its simplicity. So them are things, key things I think that has to be done on that interpretation principle from the federal government to the tribes in that manner and its agencies. But to have consultation with 576 tribes on ecological knowledge is going to be an absolute legit. Break it up into regions. And I think that's where this should be going. And by doing that, we
Mr. Baumann, would you like to, is there anything that you'd like to add to this conversation as we've been discussing around kind of solidifying the government to government relationship within this process as we as we work hard to get these infrastructure dollars out the door?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. I just wanted to say a few words about some of the issues that were raised this morning. First of all, we are aware that the $3.5 billion that was appropriated to the Indian Health Service under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was really aligned with the inventory in our sanitation deficiency system. So at the end of December of 2021, we had $3.4 billion worth of projects in our SDS. But that's, I think what's important for folks to understand is that's not a static list. It gets updated annually. There may be changes to state or federal regulations that require additional projects to be added. Maybe that we haven't identified all of the deficiencies that are out there, so those need to be added. And then we need to remove those that have been funded. So there will still be a need for sanitation facilities construction funding, but we are really excited about the opportunity for such an infusion of funds. There are some restrictions we have to work with this, statutory for the most part. For example, I believe the matching that was mentioned, I think that refers to the ineligible costs of our projects. So we are able to fund our water and sewer system projects that benefit Indian homes. And so there are portions we're not able to spend our appropriations on non-Indian homes or commercial businesses. But we have a responsibility to work with the tribe to identify alternate resources to fund those costs that are ineligible for our appropriations. So for example, the $581 million that will go towards 475 projects in fiscal year 2022, Tier 1 projects, we know there's $118 million of ineligible costs that go along with those projects, but we're going to be working hard to identify alternate resources.
Thank you.
We also know that the administrative and administration costs are an issue. That's why we requested the additional $49 million in the president's budget for fiscal year 2023. But we're going to be also working as hard as we can on the federal side. We're
in the entire state, but it carries through per capita to the entire country. So Region 5 under IHS really needs to be looked at under that principle of adding more funding to Region 5 to reach them unmet needs. One of the questions you said is under comments you made under the DOE is under the department that there is not a direct line or direct funding principle. We understand that, but there can be tribal set-aside, so we don't have to compete with others under that manner. And I think the tribal set-aside is very important to put into place, that tribes have that equality principle to do that. They don't have to go through a competitive process against a larger corporation or organization. Simple tribal set-aside revenue put into place can help the tribes in that manner. Miigwech, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and for providing your testimony and providing this conversation. I think that the opportunity with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act is significant. It is equally significant that we ensure that that opportunity works for Minnesota tribal nations and for tribal nations all over the country. And we've heard today from these leaders about the importance of direct funding and respect for flexibility in the way that the dollars are dispersed. We've also heard about the special challenges that small tribes and rural tribes in particular have, not only with providing matches and for finding the people to fill the jobs that you have, but realizing that you might not even have the jobs that you can fill in order to participate as fully as you might like to in the grant making process. I think it's really a good thing that we have Mr. Newland, who has experience both as a tribal leader and now working within the federal government system, who I think understands, as do I think all of our witnesses on the federal side, about what these challenges are like on the ground for tribal leaders that are trying to do the very, very best that they can to take good care of their members and their responsibilities. We also heard about the importance of the deep need for technical assistance and the challenges around trying to figure out how to put together the data that you need to put together in order to participate in these strategies. And again, sort of the historic underfunding that makes it difficult to take advantage of this now historic funding that is here to improve the lives of people living on tribal lands. And we have not today talked very much about urban indigenous communities, but this is also an extremely important thing that I keep in mind all the time as well as I think about these responsibilities. I want to thank very much Chair Anderson and the Shakopee-Mdewakanton community for hosting us today and your generosity in having us all be here. I also want to let all of our witnesses know that you may receive follow-up questions, written questions for the record from me or from other members of the committee that aren't here. So we'll let you know if we have any of those. This hearing record will be open for 2 weeks. I want to thank all of the witnesses for your time and your testimony today, and this hearing is adjourned.
Nice job, Liz.
Five of us are the only ones that.